All right. Well, it seems like the gang is all here. Why don't we, Portia, will you lead us off?
Okay.
Thank you, Portia, and thank you, Camille. So for everyone who is here now, especially for those of you who have never been to one of these before, this is the third installment of This is Milwaukee Talking. At our first one, Camille Mays, who was just playing the bell a moment ago, she led off our conversation spontaneously by playing a bell that she uses in her own healing process. And every time we do one of these, we kind of grow a little bit, we change a little bit. And while we were talking about it, one of the conversants this time, Portia, wanted to, while we were talking about Camille's practice, brought up one of her own. Portia, do you just want to describe, because a lot of folks, I don't think, caught the description of yours, the bell you just played, what it is and its significance?
I'm a practicing Nichiren Buddhist, and so at the beginning of our prayers, we strike the bell 3 times. At the end, we strike 3 times after reciting the sutra. But there is a prayer for the deceased, and that's why I struck it so many times. It allows people to kind of pay their respects to the ancestors 5 generations before, 5 generations after, or anyone who has died presently. So that's how I use the bell.
Thank you, Portia.
Okay.
So welcome everybody. We are gonna jump right into this conversation. This is the third installment of This is Milwaukee Talking. The way this project came about is about a month ago. I went on a run in my neighborhood, and I was just thinking about how this is an important moment that we hear each other, especially within our local community, and how there are so many amazing people that live and work in Milwaukee. And as I was thinking through how to have such a conversation, Mary Louise Schumacher and Kevin Miyazaki came to mind, and this project they're doing named This is Milwaukee. They've been interviewing people for over a year, some really incredible leaders in the city, people of all walks of life, of all political persuasions, all kinds of backgrounds. And I thought it would be great just to get together a couple of the people I knew participated in that for a conversation. We did that. It felt good. So we did it again. It felt great the second time. So here we are for a third conversation. Each of the conversations, we just kind of pull in a group of people that we think would have a good conversation with each other. And, every one of these conversations is sort of facilitated a little bit by the moment. Last conversation was on the day of the election. The one before that was after the first week of staying at home. A lot has happened in these past 2 weeks. A lot's on our mind, and we're going to have a conversation about democracy, about citizenship, about a lot of things. But we're also we're having this conversation on April 20th, 2020. So I'm going to start. Portia is. I'm going to start by asking you all. So Portia, John Gerda, Caitlin Cullen, our conversants today. We're not going to do the traditional thing of having everyone do kind of a panel introduction to themselves, doing their bio and CV. We're just going to jump right into it. All of them are incredibly esteemed luminaries that I admire deeply here in the city of Milwaukee. But let's just start. Portia, John, and Caitlin, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
I'm doing fine after almost 50 years of freelancing. Working out of home is not a big deal. A real saving grace for us has been our son and his family are across the street. They have a 2-year-old daughter, and we've been functioning pretty much as one household. So we get to spend a whole lot of time with a 2-year-old, which means hugs and playing and going to the woods. So that's been lovely, and a chance we wouldn't have had if it had not been for this shutdown, slowdown.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm doing well. I mean, my life has gone from being like 13-hour days all the time to a 10 to 5 gig where I have the weekend off. So all things considered, I'm doing pretty okay.
Sure.
I wanted to add that I'm teaching online, and so the semester is coming to a close, and it's taken a little bit of adjustment. But I think, we're doing the best we can, and it's kind of nice to be home more. So I walk my dog more, so that's good.
John, which of your children lives across the street?
Nikolai was our oldest. He's an MPS teacher, and he's doing a lot of Zoom like this with his kids. He's Montessori, teaches 4, 5, and 6. And his wife works for the Public Policy Forum, so she's working online. You can do those kinds of analytical reports anywhere. So
Sure.
It's a win-win. We get to spend time with Lilia, who's our granddaughter, and they get some time to do their work. So it's been a really nice combination. So it's also very cool. We live about 4 blocks away from Seminary Woods, and I don't think I have ever observed a spring so closely. The birds, the plants, the trees. That's been it's been a silver lining.
Getting your Aldo Leopold on.
That's exactly right. He may come up later.
Yeah. So I want to express an appreciation before we jump into our first question to each of you. Portia, and these are very deep Milwaukee appreciations. I went to school with your daughter, Amaker,
Yes.
and she was wonderful. John, I went to high school with your son, Anders,
right?
And he was wonderful. And Caitlin, we would have been friends in high school, I think.
I know.
But the very last thing I did before everything shut down was go to your restaurant to have a piece of pot pie that Venus Williams cooked.
Oh my God, that's right.
Yeah. That was the last time that we saw each other. But all right, and now we are going to jump into the big, weighty, heavy questions that we are here for. So the first question for each of you: what is democracy for you?
I think the landscape of democracy is changing all the time. And I asked this question of my students, and several said they just didn't know what it was, And so I think that there's this gray area for people, and maybe more pronounced right now, and maybe they didn't have to think of it until now, until we had to think of how we were going to vote, perhaps. Did it become more profound or more prescient? So I'm still grappling with what that means to me and to us right now.
I think democracy is at its root self-determination. Making a choice about who we are and where we're going, and what that means, among many other things, is respect for other people's opinions and a strong sense that we are in this together. And we have lost that sense. We have lost our way, I strongly believe, at our peril. We're become so tribalized and polarized, that a victory for our side is seen as someone else losing. And I think the democracy is when we all win. That should be what we're after, and not beating the other guy over the head.
Yeah, good answer.
I don't want to answer after John anymore.
You got to jump in faster, though.
Sorry, Caitlin.
I know, I was trying to slow. No,
Caitlin,
I think democracy.
I was
Go
gonna-
ahead. No, tell.
This
what
is
were you
like
gonna say?
this is just like double dutch. That's all. You just gotta
Okay.
you gotta find your spot.
I think democracy is just doing the shit. I think it is engaging in the world around you. And I think democracy, this might be an unpopular opinion, but I think democracy is just as much like me deciding to give free food away and work on donations as it is people acting reckless and going out in the middle of the street and maybe getting each other sick because they want to protest something. I think all of that is democracy. I think it's all of us taking that action and making choices, and the way that shakes out is probably how you create a democratic republic. I'm not sure we have one anymore that has enough stuff in common between all the people that live in it that we have one.
Well, for any of you, if we were to go back in time 2 months ago and ask this question when the horizon felt kind of normal, right? Maybe we saw the clouds gathering. Do you feel like the last couple months, this last stretch, has changed or fundamentally altered in any way how you're looking at this question of what is democracy?
For me, not at all. But what has been apparent in the last 2 months is the transparency of efforts to subvert and undermine democracy in high places, and I think that has been so overt, and it distresses me, and I hope that comes around to bite folks in the ass who are perpetrating.
John, do you consider yourself a radical?
No.
Just wanted to get that on the record.
I don't think so. I mean, radical means root. So I think we're talking about roots here is what we're after.
Radical means what?
Roots. Radical comes from the word root. Radix means root. Getting back to roots.
And you don't think you are?
I don't think so. No, I think I'm not sure where I put myself. I certainly a progressive. Absolutely, I'll own that label easily.
Interesting.
For sure, Caitlin, have you been feeling about in the last couple months, this last stretch, that your answer to that question or the way you see democracy has been changed, or maybe you're just getting more evidence of what you already knew?
I don't think it's getting more evidence of what I already knew. It's getting more evidence of discovering what it should be. Discovering what it should be, and maybe that in my day-to-day, I didn't really think about it. I'm sure I act on it in ways that gives back or is conscious of other things concerning people and freedoms, and especially in traveling. I took a trip to West Africa in December, so I could see what democracy is in another place and what it isn't. What we assume it to be and how it functions or does not function in another place. So it just broadens my question, I guess, of, how the world sees us and how we see other parts of the world.
Yeah, I don't have much to say. I mean, I think my idea of democracy looks the same. Where I spend all my time, we operate in a place where maybe our democratic process, our way of engaging always looks different than maybe like what you see in the news. And so a lot of what's happening feels like a lot of the same. I don't think my definition of democracy has changed much.
Sure.
You kind of run the tandem republic.
We run our own republic. Yeah, I mean, we operate the way that we feel like it, and
right.
so it feels a lot. I mean, it's different a lot, but a lot of the same. No,
that's a parent just walking in. Yeah.
Yeah, when I'm walking out, I normally think to myself, "This is what democracy tastes like." But I'm not yelling it at anyone.
Yeah, right.
It's a veggie burger.
Yeah, you know what I get. So to everyone who's here, I just want to actually make this note because we didn't make it up front. is the last time we did this conversation, and we suffered from the incredible phenomenon known as Zoom bombing, and we had about a quarter of the people who came were here to disrupt us. So what we did this time is we disallow people from unmuting themselves, and we also disabled the chat. We are going to open the chat up in about 20 minutes or so for people to make comments and ask questions. And I was asking myself the question, does that feel undemocratic, kind of limiting the speech? But you wouldn't go to a discussion in public where every single person had a lapel mic on. So I think it's okay that that was my way of making myself feel okay about what we're doing. So.
Also, the likelihood of someone exposing their genitals at every single thing you go to in public is much lower than when you're in a Zoom chat.
You know, what I like about this, though, because we can see you, if anyone exposed their genitals, they'd have to, like, do it as themselves, as opposed to, like, doing a screen share of someone else's genitals. I think that's actually, like, that's like you have to not be a coward if you want to expose yourself, which I think, frankly, like, get in touch with your kink, right? Okay. So our second question, after a little bit of sorbet there, to what extent are you optimistic about the future of the country? I'll read it again. To what extent are you optimistic about the future of the country?
I remain cautiously optimistic. I think American society from the very beginning has gone through periodic swings where self has been the driving force, and then community has been a driving force. And in times of emergency, you know, community takes the upper hand. In times of threat, self takes the upper hand. So I think what we're seeing now is sort of this, you know, the pendulum keeps on swinging, you know, as I think Tom Barrett says, keeps on swinging, just make sure it doesn't hit you in the ass. but we're in a period, I think, where the emphasis is absolutely on the individual at the expense of the community. But I think for the long haul, I remain optimistic.
I think we have to remain hopeful and optimistic. We have to find that glimmer of hope in everything. I always refer back to something my mother repeats all the time, and she's been here 98 years. And she'll say again and again, this too shall pass. Mm-hmm. And that's an old saying, you know, yeah. And so it's gotten her through many, many things. I can't even imagine her being a child of the generation of the Depression. I think about that, you know, and the things that I'm remembering now because of that, like remembering how well stocked our pantry was with canned goods or dry goods. So there was hope in that there would be provision somehow, you know, that she would provide as best as she could as a single parent. And so I feel like some days you wake up and you read all the news and you don't feel hopeful. Like some days I wake up and I'm like, we all have it now. We just all have it, you know? And you walk outside and you see behaviors that are like, well, damn, it's like what? It feels like we're going to be in a holding pattern until there's some form of enlightenment for every person, you know? But then I feel we take 2 steps forward and 1 step back all the time. Like, you know, we feel like we're making progress. Maybe you don't see as many of your neighbors outside or, you know, too close together. And then you go outside and you see 12 people playing basketball.
Yeah.
I ask myself that question all the time. I just try to keep the glimmer of hope going, knowing that I feel like every individual is responsible and every individual is a reflection of their environment, and that we all have the potential to change something in our environments, whether it's our neighborhoods, whether it's our neighbors, other individuals. We affect that change in our own behaviors, or, you know, how we meet those obstacles every day. And that's hard it's an adjustment. It's like, you know, it's a practice to feel that way.
I feel like humankind has always been kind of a dumpster fire, and everybody's been optimistic for all that time. I don't know. I think we might be like one of the biggest colossal mistakes that's ever happened in the universe. And so optimism is maybe all we have. Every time you get to the next generation or the next new nation or whatever the hell it is, it gets better. Being a queer woman in my 30s is better than it was being a queer kid in my teens. Like, I think the optimism is just about improvement. And there's always going to be like 12 kids hooping. And you're like, dude, you're not supposed to be hanging out right now. But maybe there's some optimism in that decision. You know, maybe they're doing that to be someplace else that's positive. I don't know. I'm very optimistic. It's the only choice we got.
I go all over the place, Caitlin, responding to like, if we were to have the digital, like if we had Zoom 100 years ago during the last pandemic, there would have been Zoom bombers then too, because there were people who were disruptive perverts back then as well, or whatever their agenda is. There, but I also think another thing is now if you go to the basketball court at a different time in our history, you could have said to someone, hey, quit playing basketball. And there might be a sense of kinship between you and them. I feel like there's a little bit less now. Like, I feel like, and in part, I think it's been enabled by digital technology. I think in some ways, since now that everyone has a tablet or a device or a smartphone, you don't know your neighbors. And so now it's a little bit less like the community maybe has less authority in the place of the individual.
It feels like policing. Like I have to ask myself, am I going to be perceived as policing somebody? You know, but I find my behavior around this whole COVID thing, when I go into a space where I have to buy food or something, I feel like my armor is on. I feel I don't show my bodhisattva self. I feel like I have to be stern and mean, or, you know, like, you're in my space, back up, you know, kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that feels weird. That feels.
I feel the same thing. I wonder how long it's going to be before, you know, we can shake hands, much less hug again, you know, with any.
Are we ever going to shake hands again?
I don't know. I hope so. I'll shake your hand, Caitlin.
Thanks, John.
But I do feel that people are more more aware of their interconnectivity in some way, that they actually need each other, you know. I feel that I see more gravity of people trying to get close than they ever have before, you know, so.
I feel like there's also people revolting against interconnectivity too, right? Like you see people for whom the idea of interconnectivity is offensive. And maybe even their whole way of life has been built around the denial of it.
Yeah, or taking up space. That's interesting. You know, it's like I feel that people who have always occupied the spaces they wanted to, they don't know how to not do that right now. I think there's a lot of privilege around space right now. I wrote a poem. I started a series of COVID poems, and I wrote something about those feelings that I was feeling every time I went outside. I felt like the nearby park that used to not be occupied is now over-occupied, and that people are, you know, it's like prime real estate right now to be outside.
You have the poem, Portia? You have the poem handy?
I do, but I'll find it and then read it.
Actually, Portia, another poetic thing that you made a shrimp and grits mask. Do you have that?
Do I have it's I can go get it. I can show it to you.
Would you mind going and getting it? Portia made this incredible hand-sewn mask. Sorry, Portia's been so remarkably aesthetically productive that we're making too many requests for her to field all at once.
But just this whole idea of space, you know, this was maybe a week into the shutdown. We're walking the bike path, you know, near the lakefront, and a guy in his probably early 20s took a look at it. He was wearing a mask, which was at the time was a little strange, and took about maybe a 10-foot detour around us. 2 months ago, that would have been bizarre behavior. it would have been saying, what is wrong with this human being? And now it's become the norm. I mean, that really has been just a dramatic and really rapid change in how
Yeah.
our expectations of how we behave in public space.
When I go on a run, it feels like Frogger, and when I go grocery shopping, it feels like Pac-Man. It's a really weird.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah. Cool. We sent Portia on a mission to retrieve an art piece. And why don't we go to the next question? We are on time. So when you think, oh, Portia, you're here, right in time to hear this. When you think about Milwaukee and its challenges, what are the challenges that feel most pressing right now? When you think about Milwaukee and its challenges, what are the challenges that feel most pressing right now? And I'm going to do a little bit of facilitation. Caitlin, I want you to go first.
Yeah. Ooh. How do we stop fucking Black and brown people all the time? That seems like the biggest challenge Milwaukee faces. Like, even in a time of pandemic, like not even,
Yeah.
we're
Especially.
not surprised. It's affecting like my neighborhood really super bad for a million reasons, because people aren't healthy, because you don't have good access to shit, because by the time you got off work, there was no hand sanitizer or bleach left in the store. Like, because you still have to go to work, and there's 7 people in your house living there that all have to go to work at different places because that's how you support a life. Like, that is always number 1, 2, and 3 on my things that is a pressing issue for Milwaukee. And it's just highlighted even more now than it was 2 months ago, which is crazy because it was pretty bad 2 months ago.
Yeah.
I don't mean to laugh. It's just at some point, like, you get worn out saying the same thing over and over.
I feel like it's the disenfranchised across our communities, you know. On the day of voting, that was really present for me, you know, like I was able to drive downtown and turn in my ballot, but I think about people who sent away for ballots and didn't get them.
Yeah.
We sent twice. My partner and I sent twice and still stood at Riverside a mile long into the line at 7:15 in the morning in masks with police circling us. And like it was a pretty diverse group of folks. I mean, it was like everybody just sitting there trying to do something that we already tried to do properly, safely.
Yeah. So even that, like, and then because I live alone or I live with my dog, trying to figure out who was supposed to sign the ballot. And asking a neighbor, which I did, but it's like, okay, well, if I'm trying to stay away from people now, I'm kind of, okay, do I have to worry about them touching the paper? Them, you know, it's like, but I feel the disenfranchised. And I think about students a lot, those who live in dorms or live on campus or rent apartments and work part-time, and maybe some of them work on campus, and having to drop their courses, you know, and not everybody has a home they can go to. So it made me think of artists, you know, how people may have been doing well as, you know, emerging entrepreneurs, and this whole thing just
Blew it up.
Yeah. I think about the disenfranchised in many different facets of our community.
I think the voter turnout was a sign of hope, you know, that people would actually risk their lives is what it came down to exercise their right to vote. I think it's absolutely outrageous, you know, that they were forced to make that decision, but the fact that so many did, I think shows promise, you know, for citizenship going ahead. In terms of Milwaukee's challenges, I agree with both Caitlin and Portia. It's kind of closing that gap between people who really don't have anything and actually have, you know, sort of negative net worths and kind of behind the 8 ball from the very start. And like many of us, you know, who live in myself, white privilege, you know, who pretty much take these things for granted. And that gap, I think, is wider than it ever has been. in Milwaukee's history. And it's not just Milwaukee, obviously. It's America. This is something that has been getting worse and worse over time, and we have yet to begin to get a handle on it.
John, can you say, because we're creating a record here, exactly the way Caitlin said it? Will you say,
why are brown and black people getting fucked all the time?
Yeah. Yay. Because you know the answer, right? Better than anyone, probably.
Can I read the COVID poem before I lose it?
Oh, yeah, please, yeah.
Let's do it.
Okay. This is poem number 1. During social distancing walks, I observe my neighbors tailgate, drink wine and other spirits in their backyards, gather nightly to sing in common spaces, excitedly wave me over from front porches. I walk swiftly by, pull my mask higher, shout from a distance, "You're too close."
I like that.
There's my mask.
And that's the shrimp and grits mask.
Is that a menu? Is that a menu, Portia?
It's written in color.
Can you give us a closer look, actually? I'd love, I don't.
There you go, Caitlin.
So it was
So
it has a recipe, but the recipe is written in dialect, in Gullah dialect.
Oh.
Oh, man.
From South Carolina. So the ingredients, it was a bag with ingredients that you add to shrimp. So.
Okay.
I love the three of you. All right.
So, can you breathe through that, Portia? Is it pretty breathable?
Not anymore. It just says, let me see. Oh, I can't even begin to read it. I know that instead of water, as we say, it's a water.
What?
DDA. Bring cooking in a nutter pot and DDA. While that's cooking in a nutter pot, add a 3/4 cup of water to the gravy mix. Stir in, simmer. So you simmer it.
Okay.
About 20 minutes. So it just goes on like that. And butter is butter, BUDDA. So
You taking notes, Caitlin?
Straight from the Gullah Underground.
Yeah, right.
Straight from the Gullah Underground.
So
and we don't say shrimps, we say swimps. So
I want to now just mention to the folks who are in the room that we're going to open the chat up in the next, after this next question. The plan was to open it up around 7:40, 7:45, and we're on track for that, to write comments or questions. If you have waited to Zoom bomb us for this long to write something vile in the chat,
Please.
I'm impressed that you're waiting.
It's about democracy. Do what feels right.
Yeah, Kate, you have Caitlin's approval. So the last question before we open up is, what are the qualities that matter most to you and our political leaders? What are the qualities that matter most to you and our political leaders? And I also just want to say leaders in general. So if you want to answer that as political leaders, leaders in general, what qualities matter most?
I really think it involves finding a need, whether that be through like consulting with other people, reading scientific studies, doing your research, going out and talking to folks, and doing the damn thing. Like when we just started working with the World Central Kitchen, which is crazy. They contacted us over the weekend and said, like, we'd really love to help support you making meals. And I thought it would be some big circle jerk where you don't know who's doing what or who's going to help, or some contract where you got to wear a shirt. And really, they just want to do the damn thing. People got to eat. Stuff is really hard right now. How do we facilitate this happening? And I was so moved by that in a way I haven't been moved by a leader in any sense in a long time. I think it's, figuring out what has to happen, trying your best to figure out what the best plan of approach is, and then doing the shit for me.
Yeah, I like to see the image of someone called a leader or a politician with their sleeves rolled up or their boots on the ground and, face to face, not just for a photo op. I feel that I trust them more if they've come from the place that they're serving or that they care about communities that are often misrepresented. Um, but I think back on song. I was listening to a song last night by Bob Marley, and I listened to so many of his songs. I don't remember the title, but I do remember in there where he says, "Never trust a politician." No, never let a politician grant you a favor. And I started really thinking about that, like more, like never, because it feels like you'll always be kind of in debt to that person in a way that's unsavory. So, it shouldn't be them doing something for a favor. They should be just doing it.
Just doing the thing.
Right.
Yeah. I think the two things I look for is certainly as part of doing the thing. The two things I look for in a leader are compassion and competence,
Mm-hmm.
and those are both really important. You can have someone accomplished with one and not the other, but you need them both. To be a leader who really inspires people to follow them and kind of carries through as well. Neither one is sufficient on its own, but those are the two things I look for.
For sure.
It's one,
Sorry, Portia, say that again.
somebody put something in chat.
Oh.
Oh, revolution. Thank you for that.
So the chat is now open. Feel free to write some questions. I'm just going to get a little mushy for a second and just say that I deeply appreciate the way that all three of you lead in very different ways and in similar ways sometimes. Caitlin, I just want to say, as someone in a relatively similar age group to you, I just love that you said when this started, who cares what a restaurant is? I need to feed people. And I think the fact that you, and I'm sure you're maybe getting a little cynical from how many people are thanking you and congratulating you all this time, but just the fact that you said, I don't give a fuck about anything other than taking care of community. The fact that all these restaurants have now come probably to do things they would never have thought of doing before, to serve community people in the community that they may never have had any interaction with. I think the fact that you just you got the shit done, and you showed other people what to do, and you accepted them in joining you and doing that. It's just incredible. And I think
that's leadership.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, it feels pretty good. I made like a really reckless decision, as I'm wont to do when I think something's a good idea, and it seems to be working.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, so thanks. Thanks for just being a fucking badass person. Yeah.
I was raised Catholic when Mother Teresa was really hot. I had no choice.
She's always been hot.
All right. So Camille asked the question, do you see us as a city unifying or coming into awakening to better ourselves more now due to this pandemic? So do you see the city seeing this as an opportunity to awaken or unify?
I do, as artists, I feel like, people in this conversation, there's a poem one time written by someone that I loved, and it was called, "You Gotta Have Your Tips on Fire." So you have to keep your tips on fire. You have to be kind of ahead of the curve, or it's an opportunity for us to be still and to think about how our work impacts others, that we're not so self-centered anymore. I don't know. It is kind of a centering, but I feel that we have the potential, and that there will be a wave of actions that could follow this. That's my feeling about belonging to a community of creatives.
I'm personally skeptical about the power of this crisis or any other to have kind of a transforming effect.
Mhm.
I think maybe in a war, World War II, where your way of life was physically at risk, you could lose, the things that were part of what you considered your birthright. That's a time when people pull together. This is a war, but it's against an invisible enemy, and one that has us, instead of pulling together, kind of sheltering apart. So it's a lot of really different dynamics. And I wrote in a Journal Sentinel column, it said, there's short of a visit from an alien, it's hard to imagine anything that could reinforce our sense of a common humanity.
Mhm.
And that's really true in this age of instant communication. I'm skeptical about the power or the possibility of that being transformed into a sense of shared fate, as all of us together.
Mhm.
I think at the restaurant, we're operating in a place where most of the people we spend time with, talking to, and kicking it with are people who work in restaurants and live in those sectors. Um, and I am seeing a unifying thing. So Adam said it, like, there's all these restaurant partners. People are coming out the woodwork. There's Johnny's in the chat right now. His ass just keeps showing up and picking up containers to put food in it. And his place is in West Dallas. I think maybe we're in a unique space where not everyone who's on the panel and in this chat is, where like all of our shit could go away. We could all crash and burn and die and lose all the jobs that we have, all of the industry that we have. And so knowing that that's all at stake, like you said in World War II, where you have a common enemy and you're facing a real peril, it's really changed the way at least people in the service industry are communing with one another and are working together and are getting stronger together.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
So folks, you can ask questions in the chat. You can make comments even too. I'm a little surprised we have the most people we've had at any of them, and we're also getting the least questions. Quick question for Caitlin. At first, the tandem did curbside pickup. How did you decide so quickly to just do community meals?
We were doing them side by side for like a day and a half, and people really were trying to support our community meals by ordering a bunch of chicken, and things just got dangerous feeling. It got to be like we were doing too many things, and meanwhile the demand for meals was just rising and rising. And so I looked at my staff and we talked and said, like, what do we want to be remembered for? Like, what do we want to do in a time that feels really fucked up? Like that we made a little bit of money before we went out of business, or that we did what we thought was right. And so everyone agreed. It was a group decision. It was 6 of us standing there, and everyone said, like, yeah, let's do it. And so it was a no-brainer.
All right. Santiago, given the issues of segregation within our community, what role can artists play in lessening our divisions? Also, could Portia please demonstrate the mask and please read the poem again?
By popular demand.
Okay, let me see. Okay, let me read a different poem, but it's part of the series, if you don't mind. Is that okay?
Sure.
Of course.
This one is COVID poem number 3. Human beings, fragile, needy, and greedy, move from behind closed doors, fenced yards into open spaces. Nature and the environment become prime real estate. Once gently used bike, running, walking trails, crowded highway treadmills. Our Pac-Man bodies move, shift in strategic diagonal squares. I don't know if you like that one as much. There you go. And here's my mask again.
Diagonals.
And I'm covering a lot, like, ooh, I'm all the way up here.
It's a good mask.
Styling.
If it covers my eyes, I gotta pull it down.
And the question, and I think well, I don't know, you guys can identify however you want. Given the issues of segregation in our community, what role can artists play in lessening our division?
Whew. Continue to be productive, to support one another. I think artists are are innovators anyway. I think we're innovators anyway. And I expect that there will be production, coming from forthwith from the experience. And I don't question that at all. I feel that the conversations between artists and I love that there are some measures within Milwaukee to support artists who really need the immediate help. I think that is a strength in being a part of that community.
Yeah, when you think about it, my hopeful side, I think that it's possible to look at this whole experience as kind of a cocoon.
Mm-hmm.
And we have no idea what's going to come out of this, when the chrysalis finally opens.
Yeah.
Could be exciting.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons, I know I'm not a panelist, but one of the things I love so much about certain kinds of artists is their ability to operate in a space of unbounded imagination. And we in Milwaukee bind ourselves a lot in the patterns that we know and the tribalism, as John mentioned at the beginning. And that's one of the reasons, just to go back to one more time, Caitlin, you're a little overblown. Just kidding.
Dude, I don't want to talk
anymore. No, but of how unbound your imagination was and just saying, fuck it, I'm going to do something different. So I think that idea that we can be a very bound place, and then I'm going to use that as a, to go into Kai's question here, which I think gets to why we're so bound sometimes. What do you see as the greatest challenge to cross collaboration across communities, missions, etc. in Milwaukee? Do you think silo thinking can be overcome for the long haul?
First of all, you got to remember that we've got a guy in Milwaukee who raps Dr. Seuss to Dr. Dre. That's not bound.
And he gave me one of my favorite dishwashers we've ever had at the restaurant too. He's outside of the
yeah. Someone put that in the chat. So to the question though, Kai's question about siloing and what gets in the way of collaboration across communities. Any thoughts about what the challenges are to that and how that can be overcome?
I think there are a lot of challenges to collaborating across any community. I really like Kai. And so once upon a time, she came to me at the restaurant and said, I work with all these female refugees who are chefs, and I want to get them out in the world and give them something to do and a way to get exposure. I think and we've been doing that ever since. I think one of the only ways to get past that is to just keep trying. Mm-hmm. She might have knocked on 20 doors before she hit the 3 chefs that wanted to do this. But I don't know. I think we can get past the silos. I think we have. I think it's a good question, though. Ask somebody else who doesn't know you and hasn't gone past that silo.
I think it's always possible, too. I think the first step there is recognizing that you're in a silo.
Yeah.
That's often the hardest part.
Yeah. I think that this situation has created an opportunity, although it feels like it is more polarizing. I live close to Tulsa, down the street from Brookfield, and you know what happened there this weekend. But it is there is polarizing energy around all the time. But I feel like it is a time to kind of, if I were to reimagine or write something creative, and I have my students kind of working on this idea, would they like to write something, and maybe it might be sci-fi, whatever genre they chose, to basically as some kind of cathartic moment to capture what is happening right now, right? Because I was thinking those thoughts. I was thinking about, how would you reimagine yourself, or how are we reimagining ourselves if everything did go away? So what if there was no more university? What if the person I rent a house from could not pay mortgage, lost whatever? What if we found ourselves in that space of not having? How would we eventually have to come together? It's a thought I don't like to have, but it is kind of a way to kind of push ourselves to consider and appreciate what we do have.
Yeah.
Your mother had to answer that in the Depression.
Pardon me?
Your mother had to answer that in the Depression.
Yeah.
What do you do? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think of all the different situations for African American communities. I think of, I think of Katrina. I think of a lot of situations. We're not even talking about the storms that have happened, across the South, and people who've been deeply affected. So it is one of those things where people, I mentioned this the other day. There was a podcast that was on NPR, and the speaker was talking about a study she had done on loose and tight societies or cultures. And the tighter the society, the better able they were to deal with situations like this because they were more prepared. And I don't have all the examples, but you can look it up. It was on WUWM. But it gave me some framework to kind of think through the questions that I've had or questions that have come up, for me during meditation or something. But I thought about that, like, we can be so loose in some things and so tight in other things, but it really felt like we weren't as prepared as we thought we were because we never imagined this would happen in our time.
Yeah.
But things like this have happened in other places. And we kind of look through the screen and watch it or don't watch it, turn away from it, but now that it's happening to us, it's like, this is real, it's a real thing. I just had deja vu, like I've been on here before saying these same
that was yesterday.
Yeah.
with people. So.
I want to share, Sarah Noble wrote in the comments, the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible.
Ooh.
Quote from Tony Kade Bambara. I don't know that name. So
Tony Kade Bambara.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Sarah also adds, all of us need to be artists. Thank you, Sarah. Melanie Arians writes, often artists are relied on to unify us and interpret for us. Artists of all media are already distilling how we are feeling in this time of uncertainty. It is great to support artists through this because when we come out on the other side, we will expect them to help us heal. Full disclosure, she's an artist. I will use that as just a quick entry point to say, all of you whose faces and names I recognize that are here right now, there's about 70 people, that makes me feel optimistic. There are a lot of really incredible people who are here right now. This is a really, the people that I know who are here in Milwaukee, you are the people that I feel connected to, and I'm so happy, and not just because you're here. Thank you for coming. I'm gonna find a question here. So this is one is a little targeted, but I think people will, from Luke and Courtney. John, do you have any specific stories about how the 1918 pandemic affected Milwaukee?
Yeah, it was this whole experience they're talking about it being unprecedented. It's not. We went through the same thing back in 1918, and with greater loss of life and sort of less adequate medicine as well. So if there's a lesson from that period, it's that social distancing works. There was they shut down the city in the last few months of 1918, and people the streetcars were relatively empty. People were going to work in masks, and they finally, when the curve had been flattened, they weren't using that term, but when they flattened the curve, they opened things up again. But the churches had to have every other pew, movie theaters every other row. So it was the same thing that we're doing today, the kind of keeping our distance. And Milwaukee had either the first, depending on the period you're talking about, either the lowest or the second lowest death rate in the entire country. And that's a time when Milwaukee's governors were largely socialists, and they succeeded in putting together this very effective coalition, multi-partisan, saying public health it's us. Let's take care of ourselves and the neediest among us as well. Not just those who can afford the best health care. So that the lesson is, that those things worked in 1918 and they can work in 2020.
How did their election go? Just kidding. Portia, can you tell
you in November?
Yeah. Portia, can you check the chat? Irma just asked if it's the NPR story. It's from Hidden Brain. So I
Yes,
think it is the right one.
that's the right one. Yeah.
It is the correct one.
Yeah.
That guy's good.
Here's a good question from Matt. For folks that are newer or don't have many existing connections but want to get more involved in Milwaukee, do you have recommendations for resources or places where people might start to discover opportunities?
Boy. Certainly, in terms of age groups, the millennials, Milwaukee, Fuel. I mean, there are lots of points of entry, to kind of get into things that make a lot of sense. And the field I work in, Historic Milwaukee Incorporated, volunteering to be tour guides, working with the tour groups. Milwaukee County Historical Society is always welcome to. People are encouraged to volunteer there. So there are lots of places to get in.
Mhm.
When it's a little safer, belling up to your local bar is a pretty good way to get involved in stuff, especially if you find a place that's interesting and progressive. You're liable to find somebody like Adam or Deanna sitting next to you and they'll talk your ear off about something.
I also feel that local galleries, independently owned galleries, 5 Points is a great one. And also the gardens. I'm a member of Alice's Garden. I've been over there for, gosh, about 10 years, I think.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so I think that those are ways to definitely connect with people across age groups, across communities. There's something magical that happens when you're massaging soil
Mhm.
and understanding how food nourishes us in so many different ways in the community.
I'm going to say something I think that's a little annoying, but I do believe in, which is to also don't just go by what people recommend. Like what I frequently just go and drift in the city and go to places I've never heard of before, or no one's ever said, this is a place you should go to. A lot of times, it can feel like Milwaukee is a small city, but it's actually like 180 small cities stapled together. So, don't over rely on recommendations when people tell you what to do and where to go, and let yourself get lost. Because there's still a lot of Milwaukee that I don't know. John, do you feel that way?
Absolutely. And I think give yourself every opportunity to be a minority, regardless of your background. Be someplace where you're not with people who look or act or behave like you. I think that's important, and that's really easy to do in Milwaukee because there are so many cultures here.
I was thinking about Kai and her work with refugees. That came out of her heart. She didn't wait for somebody to tell her to do those things. She just did them, and so it's remarkable. I've met people from communities that she's worked with and seen how they were flourishing and heard their story, so it's really to be in a place when you can appreciate someone's struggle to be here and to survive here, so and to know that someone did that just because they were compassionate.
It's that great. I think of that phrase a lot. To see the me in thee.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put in the chat right now, there's a book that was recently published named Green Card Youth Voices. And what they did is actually across Milwaukee and Madison talk about another siloing and split. But high schoolers from Pulaski, coming from all over the world in immigrant situations, many of them as refugees, wrote these last year. So they wrote essays in the year 2019 about their path to Milwaukee. I read them just like a month and a half ago, and they're stunning. It's stunning to read the stories, because a lot of times we'll hear the story of refugees maybe filtered through media or one way or another, but these are young people in their own voices. It's a really great collection. So I put that in. Okay, we have 1 minute left. I'm going to read really quick. There were a couple questions we weren't able to get to, but Mary Louise Schumacher wrote from JFK, the artist, however faithful to his personal vision of reality, becomes the last champion of the individual mind and sensibility against an intrusive society and an officious state. Man, a president wrote this. if sometimes our great artists have been the most critical of our society, it is because their sensitivity and their concern for justice, which must motivate any true artist. All right. That is a great place to end, actually. And a reminder, this is the third installment of This is Milwaukee Talking. We'll probably do another. This one went pretty well. We were worried about Zoom bombers, but all of you are good humans that came. Then also, I highly, highly recommend to look up This is Milwaukee. They have a Facebook, they're on Instagram. They interviewed around 100 people of different walks of life in Milwaukee. The portraits that Kevin made are stunning and beautiful. The interviews that Mary Louise did are phenomenal, and they're edited really well. So I highly suggest checking out that project. And yeah, we're going to be back probably in 2 weeks. I'm going to make my background, actually just to show everyone how little I changed my clothes. That's my image from, that's, I'll be
There you go.
Yeah, Darth Adam. I'll put my hoodie up.
One thing,
Right.
there was something in here from Linda Spice, which I think should be read.
Oh, go for it.
Important. I am concerned for some of our community's children who do not have access to resources right now to succeed online. What do you think we can all do as individuals and citizens, either now or when school is back in session, to help these children so they can catch up and be successful? That's a long question, but I thought it should be.
No, for sure.
That sounds like homework
Yeah,
for us, not for the kids.
Right.
for sure. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you particularly Caitlin, Portia, and John for making time on this Monday evening. You guys were really wonderful. I do feel filled with joy for having had this conversation, and I didn't even have to jump rope. So thank you guys very much.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
So long.
I'll finish my sangria.
Okay. I got a beer and Caitlin can start her for us.
Yeah, I got you.
All right, see everybody.
See ya.